Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking your time out and talking story with us today. So as Marina said, my name is Lianne Picot and I'm a story coach and my business is called Very Good Stories. I help nonprofits and businesses to increase engagement internally and externally using story. For many years, I was an executive director in Canada and the UK, and I worked for a variety of organizations and causes. Before that, I was a practitioner working in homelessness, mental health, youth, and engagement, volunteering. I have been listening to the stories of people and organizations and helping them to tell new ones for a very long time, and it's my big passion in life. So I'm so excited to be able to share that with you today. So thanks for being here again. So now, as you will see from the webinar today, there's a lot more to story than just storytelling. So you may have heard about storytelling, and I just wanted to clarify from the very beginning, storytelling is a technique or a tool, but story can be used in lots of different ways in your organization to make it healthier and more engaging, both internally with your employees, but externally with your funders and donors. Now today we're mostly focusing on employees, but there will be some helpful information here for when you're considering how you work with your clients or your communities, as well as your funders, donors, volunteers. So let's get started. So first of all, our employee engagement rates in Canada and the US are pretty appalling. As you can see, they're high numbers. Now, I can't tell you what this is a Gallup poll in 2013, and these numbers have been consistent for years, for the last few years before that. I can't tell you what this breaks down to in the nonprofit sector, but what we do know is in the nonprofit sector we've been under strain for quite some time, and we've had to restructure, we've had to make big changes. We also know that our pay and our benefits and sometimes our working conditions are not as good as the for-profit sector, and good being air quotes, please, because I'm going to share with you that in the research, interestingly enough, and this is through the Gallup State of the Global Workplace report, but many others, there's a real trend that people are saying that it's not money they want, it's meaning. So when in the nonprofit sector we talk about our conditions not being as good, we need to really think about that, because the employee engagement rates are this bad because people are not finding meaning in their work. So that's a really interesting thing for us as a nonprofit sector. And, you know, sure, people want to be paid well, right? We want to be recognized. However, it's not everything. And actually, there's a really interesting disconnect between what managers and leaders often think that people want and what they actually do want. And so a lot of times we think people want raises, and in actual fact they want to know that they're doing something of importance in the work that they're doing. So as a nonprofit sector, we're kind of ahead of the game, but I'm going to tell you not for long, because we have, as you might have seen in business, there's a lot of business, and partly in response to these statistics and these kinds of trends, a lot of businesses are now actively making sure that they have a social mandate within their own business, or, as you probably know, there's a lot of businesses starting with a social mandate at their core. So they talk about social change, they talk about community engagement, they talk about changing the world. So the terrain that previously was really ours in the nonprofit sector for drawing people who are interested in meaningful, and I mean meaningful as in changing communities, changing people's lives, that kind of work has often been the terrain of the nonprofit sector or government. However, the for-profit sector moving into that space means that we'll be competing for employees with them, and we'll be competing to keep our employees. So if we think about the terrain that we're looking ahead on, those for-profits are talking about changing people's lives, and they have the resources to pay their staff really well. So we need to get really, really good at ensuring that our employees know that they're making a real difference. And that's why I love doing this kind of work with nonprofits, because I really believe in the sector, and I believe in our ability to make a real difference in real people's lives, and we just need to start talking about it in a better way. So let's start talking about engagement and what it means. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment of time. You're having a busy day. Take this moment, enjoy it. Sit back, close your eyes if you want to. Relax your body. And I would like you to think about a time when you were really, really engaged in something. When you lost track of time. You were completely in the moment, completely in the flow, forgot about everything else. So just sit and think about that. It can be work, it can be personal, it could be a hobby. Just a time when you just lost yourself. Stay there for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to pull you back. How did it feel? When you're in that moment, how did it feel when you're doing that activity? If you could type your response in the question box, that'd be great. Fulfilled, hopeful, relaxed, thank you. Rewarding, great, complete relaxation, weightlessness, calm, excited, fulfilled, connected, inspired, enthusiastic, satisfied, energized, calm, energizing, good, so productive, like nothing else mattered. Exactly. So thank you, everybody. That's huge. Elated, quiet. Could talk about this all day, right? So that's when we talk about engagement, brain was running. Yeah, thank you. When we talk about engagement, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a feeling. We're talking about this moment. So as we go through today's webinar, I want you to keep in touch with this feeling because it's important. As we talk about employee engagement, it's not all about stats. It's about this feeling. And I'm going to ask you how many people you think, and not to respond, but for yourself to think about as we go through today. How many of your employees, how many of the people you work with, your colleagues around you, feel like this at work? And how often do you feel like this at work? It's really important. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. That was really great. So here's the thing. When you feel good about being at work, and when you feel those things that we're talking about, and it doesn't have to be every single task, right? Like not every moment of the day. We're not going to feel elated. I don't feel elated about writing budgets. I don't know about you. Some of you do. I know some of you do, but it's not my thing. So it's not every task. It's about an overall sense. It's about I'm coming to work and I feel, and like we said on the slide, it's connected. When people come, they feel like they're connected to something. They feel like they are making a contribution. And what that means for you as an organization when employees are engaged is that they want to come to work. And I'm going to say most of the time because, you know, there's always those times. And that's why we have things called duvet days or mental health days when we just don't want to get out of bed. But we don't want people feeling like that every day. So they also feel enthusiastic about your organization. They're okay with thinking about change. They're enthusiastic about what you're doing overall. So little things don't matter as much. They'll contribute willingly where it's needed. And this is, you know, we're in the nonprofit sector, no matter what size you are, we're all constrained. We all need, you know, more money, more time, more people. So having people come to work and contribute in a way that is plentiful, that's pretty awesome. And then the other thing is they'll want to stay with you. And so, you know, we can't afford to have huge turnover all the time. We train our people up, we get them, you know, they're doing a great job. We want them to stay. It's really, really important. Okay. So here's a little poll for you all. And if you go to your polls section. So I'm wondering how many of your organizations have an employee engagement strategy. So whether that's a formal strategy or an informal strategy, the responses are yes, no, I don't know. So if you could just click one of those, that'd be great.
Thanks, Lianne. It's looking like we've got most people voting here, so we'll just give another few seconds if you want to just go ahead and click the answer that works for you there on the screen. And wow, those are interesting results, Lianne.
Wow. Actually, you know what? 52% are no. Okay, that's high. 29%, I'm actually surprised. That's really good. That's actually pretty good. 30%, like we looked at the stats at the beginning, that it's a serious issue. So the fact that you've got a 29% is great. But 52 plus 19, again, math, that's 71% are either saying no and I don't know. And if you're an employee in an organization and you don't know whether you have an employee engagement policy, I pretty much going to tell you you don't, or you don't have one that's working, right? Because if you don't know about it, it's not necessarily coming down the pipeline very well. So that's a big number, 71%. That aligns with the numbers that we saw at the beginning. That's almost exactly the same number of people who are not engaged at work. So now when we talk about employee engagement strategies, I just want to really clarify. For those of you who do have one, I want you to go back to the feeling. And I want you to, when you're done this webinar, go back to your policy and wonder and have a look, does it account for the feeling? Tick boxes are not a feeling, right? And again, it's important to measure, I get that. However, sometimes, and this is what's happened in business, and a lot of business folks are now saying, oh, forget employee engagement. It's because they haven't accounted for it properly in a way that makes sense to the human beings that work for them. So just have a little look at your engagement policy. Okay, so where employee engagement matters. It matters in leadership. It matters big time here, because the number one reason people say they leave their jobs or don't feel engaged is because of the leadership. So that's big. That's big. So whether you're a leader or a manager, it is your job to create an atmosphere of connection to the vision, to the purpose, and I would suggest to the results of the organization and between colleagues. Like, it's important, you know, we talk about teamwork, but what does that mean? Working alongside is not the same as feeling connected to the people that you're working with. So being a leader, no matter what your title is, it's not just about managing a series of tasks that need to get done. You have to be able to lead people and bring them along with you. So in terms of employee engagement, this is a really crucial area. So employee engagement is also very important in culture. Leadership ties into culture, but culture is really how your workplace is every day. And so this is, again, it's really key. We don't talk about culture a lot in our sector, but it's really crucial to your cause overall. How they feel about being at your organization contributes substantially to how well you meet your objectives and get things done. Culture is important. And also culture helps in those moments where we're doing stuff that we don't really love. Going in and working with people who we do care about and who we do want to work with sometimes gets us through that. So it's really important. And here's a really big one. It's really, you know, it's tempting because, like, our job as nonprofits is to serve our clients, so we put clients first. And, you know, I was always, as an executive director, I was always saying, you know, clients first. We're serving our communities. That's our mandate, and it's true. However, there's a philosophy around delivery and around working with employees that a lot of leaders are now, and a lot of business leaders like Sir Richard Branson I've quoted here. There's also Zappos is a really big company that they say they're serving happiness, and there's a number of business models now, and they really focus, and they're doing very well. They focus on the employees. And the reason why is because if they focus on the employees being happy, and I'm going to say happy as in contented, engaged, connected, not happy as in woohoo, we get donuts every day. Those help though, right? They do help. If your employees are feeling good, they will work with their clients well. They will also emanate, and it will create happy donors and volunteers, right? Like, it is a ripple effect, and that's how it works. So I'm not talking about entitlement. I'm not talking about giving employees everything that they want. I'm talking about creating substantial engagement connected to the purpose of the organization, and that's a really key thing. It's not about, it's not even necessarily about money, benefits, or anything else. It's about feeling like they are connected to you and what you do. So it also matters in external communications and relationships. Your engaged employees are your best ambassadors. They really are. Okay, so we're going to now talk about stories. So, you know, the whole piece around story, again, like I said, it's different from storytelling. Storytelling is part of it, but it's just one part. But I wanted to talk about what stories are. And first of all, people love stories. And so I would love you to test this, or maybe you can think of a moment now where you, and you're in a meeting, and, you know, there's a PowerPoint involved. There's somebody maybe even with a pointer. And there's people talking, and you're kind of zoning out, and you're kind of not really, you're thinking about what am I going to get for dinner later? What am I going to, oh, what time should I go get my kid? And, oh, what can I watch on TV tonight? Right? We do that in meetings often. And then what happens is somebody says, oh, guess what? This happened to me. Or they say, oh, I remember when. Or they say, oh, my wife, my daughter, my son, and all of a sudden what happens is our attention gets pulled back to that person. And the reason why is because we're human beings who have been using story for a very, very long time. So we are like innately connected to stories. So if you think about it, many, many years ago, before pen and stylus, we had to tell stories to survive, right? Like we had to tell stories about when the bison were running, had to tell stories about weather, about how our family traditions, things like even basic things like skills and who our family is, and we really did require a story often, because the story had to be told from generation to generation and person to person. It had to spread. So we've been using story for a very, very long time. And so what that is that's like a human, like our body has a memory for stories. It's physical. The story comes into our brain and it connects to an emotion. And the emotion pulls up an experience that you've had and connects to the information that's coming in, or the story that's coming in. I don't know, if you think about those times when you kind of have said, okay, somebody's telling you something, a story, and then you go, oh yeah, me too, I remember, and it pulls up a memory. Well, that's what happens with story. And so it's really important, and it generates an emotional response, which is really key as well. So what is a story? So I want to get really clear with you about that too, that there's no prescribed thing that is a story. It could be a really short little anecdote, it could be a metaphor, it could be a crafted tale. It could be a long description of a situation. If we think about donor letters, often that's a fairly long script story, but it's a story because it's about a person that we've served. So anything that relays something personal or work or organization related to help somebody understand what you're talking about, or about what you do, and especially about why you're doing it, that is a story. So you can use it in any way. There's no prescribed way. I'll show you at the end, there are some stories that have a nice little structure that's helpful, but I'll let you know about those. But otherwise, stories can be very short or they could be quite long. Okay, so another poll. So does your organization use story internally to talk about your impact?
Great.
So yes, no, I don't know.
And once again, we'll ask everybody to join in by voting directly on your screen. So we'll just give a few more seconds and we let a few more people participate. But once again, Lianne, the numbers are looking quite interesting.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yes. 57% said yes, 35% no, 7% I don't know. That's real. 58% yes, 35% no. That's great. You know what? I'm so happy to hear that. It's really good to know that because often we just rely so much on fact. So that's really good. And for those who've said no, obviously today is a great opportunity to take back some of your learning and to share with everybody why story is important. For those of you who did say yes, so often we use stories on an informal basis, and that's really good. That's really cool. We're going to talk a little bit more about how we can more formally address or talk about the stuff that we do through stories. So we're going to move on, but I'm really, really pleased to see so many are using story. It's awesome. So, oh, look at the coincidence. Where stories matter. This is quite a coincidence. This is the same place that employee engagement matters. You're going to see a little trend here. So, stories. It's a really great tool for leaders to convey the vision and create the connection to the cause. And we'll talk about how in a little bit, but stories matter in leadership in a very big way. So again, that's a key place for any leaders that are listening. Vision, meaning, purpose, connection, those are tied to story too. There's lots of ways you can use story and lots of ways you can communicate there. Again, culture, same as before. we create a better workplace, but part of how we know is that stories help your staff to connect to each other. So again, as human beings, rather than task-oriented folks who just share a cubicle or an open office or even offices together. It's sometimes it's the way that you can connect throughout a day that enables you to know what other folks are doing and really understand why it's important. And service delivery. So this is a big one in terms of your employees and how do your employees become happy? And part of it is they know they're making a difference. And so how do they know that? And the annual performance review, like often doesn't cut it, right? Like it doesn't always, it's not the thing that says, oh, another year of, so, and we don't, and we're going to talk a little about how we can use story later, but stories tell your employees how they're making a difference. Like there's a way of using story that enables people to really understand the impact that they're making in the organization. And then they want to do it more, which is really important. And stories also matter externally. So as we say here, your employees are already telling stories about you. And I'm not saying that in a horrible way, but it's true, right? They go out and they have dinners and they go on Facebook, and hopefully not too much talking about you there. But it's basically they're telling stories. And one of the things, if you're a leader, an HR person or a manager, got to think about what stories are they telling about you? It's a really good question, and it's a really good way of, finding out what your employees think about your organization. If you're too scared to ask, then you probably have an indicator of what kinds of stories they're telling because you're worried about what they're saying. So that's an even more important time to find out what they're saying. And again, you have to do this in a way that's inviting, that isn't punitive. But if your employees are telling stories about you that align with what you do, your purpose, your mission, how you make an impact, and we often forget these folks. Like we think about our clients, and we send them surveys, and we think about our funders, and we think about our donors, we think about our volunteers, but sometimes we forget that our employees actually leave work and they go and they're out in the world. And with social media now, there's a lot of stuff going on. So, even though people may not go and say, hey, this employer did this and name you or whatever, but if they're saying stuff about you on their, people do know that they work for you, right? And so we can look at that negatively, or we can turn it around and go, hey, wow, like, what if they really enjoyed working there? Like I watch my Facebook and Twitter and even LinkedIn, you can tell the people who really love what they do. And those are the kinds of people that you want out there kind of talking about you. So just pay a little attention to this question. What kinds of stories are your employees telling about you? Okay, so the types of stories in the nonprofit. So here are a few examples of stories that you've got in your nonprofit. The first one is the founder story. This is the story of why your organization started. So what is it that your organization was trying to do, or what was the individual who started the organization trying to do? This is really crucial because it's a key piece that people look at and go, oh, this is why you exist. And it's really tricky right now because, in the nonprofit sector, because of the lack of money that's around, and we're in survival mode, right, and have been for quite some time. And so sometimes the story that we tell is, we're still here. So, like, that's good. You need, like, you need to fund us because we've survived the last 30 years. But I'm going to tell you that that's not an inspiring story, right? Like it's not, and neither is your history. We've existed for 30 years is not your story. It certainly is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not your story. It's your history. And so taking it right back to the problem that the organization was wanting to solve is your founder story, and that's where you want to start, and that's the story you want to tell. Doesn't mean it's your current story, but it's a great story to have, and it's a great story for everybody to share. So another story, so tied to that is your impact story. So you may be 30 years old and your founder started the organization to solve a particular issue, but you've been around for 30 years, so you're doing something else, or you're doing other things, you've expanded. So your impact story is the story of who you help and how you help them now. It shows the change that occurs for people or communities you serve because of what you do. It may or may not be reflected in your mission statement. And I'm sure some of you are tempted to turn off the webinar or run away because I've mentioned the word impact. I'm going to even say outcomes. We are not, you know, these are words that are thrown around, and we're having trouble getting to grips with them. But ultimately, impact is really very simple. It's how you make a change in the people who you serve in their lives. It's all about changing lives. And so it's important for you to know what your impact story is. It's really crucial. And I'm going to give you an example. So John F. Kennedy went to NASA in the early 1960s. When he was there, he met a janitor. He politely asked the janitor what his job was at NASA. And the janitor said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." So if we think about that, that's the impact story. That is why the janitor wasn't the astronaut. The janitor was there doing the work that janitors do. But he understood the impact of his contribution was something so much bigger. So again, I'll invite you to think about your impact story. As a word nerd, I spent many hours creating mission statements, many, many hours. Your mission statement is important, but this short understanding of how you make a difference is crucial for everybody who comes into your organization, works there, volunteers there, even those that you serve. Okay, so your client impact stories. These stories back up your overall impact story and personalize the work that you do. So using these stories will show how you have helped people, and real people. So one thing that people often say, oh, what about confidentiality? You know what? It's important for you to share these stories. You can change the name, the age, where they live. You can change all sorts of aspects to reduce the opportunity for people to identify, but at the heart, you keep the experience. So that's my advice for creating your client impact stories. Even better is ask your clients if they would share their stories with you and ask them if you could share those. Sometimes, like for those of you working with clients who are in crisis or maybe vulnerable, wait a little while. Follow, those follow-up calls, the 6, 12, 1 year, month, or 12 months. Those are the times you could be collecting great stories about how you've helped. But these are also really important for your people internally, because if you're not clear, if you're not collecting stories about how your clients are being served, how can you expect new employees, your volunteers, and everybody else to know how they're meant to serve them in the future? So they also show how you work with people and give the kind of bar of the quality of service that you expect people to provide. So they're very useful. And they are also some of the most useful stories for your funders, donors, volunteers, and new employees. They want to know, how, if I come and work with you, how will people be helped? So these are important stories. And then you have your employee impact stories. So again, we sometimes forget these folks, but the employees make a difference every day somehow. And so, this is where we get into helping them understand how just turning up is not what we're expecting, and we want them to make a difference. And so this is how we help them not just turn up, because they get clear about how they're making a difference, whether they're in an administrative role, frontline, or even maintenance. You can tie what the employee is doing to the impact of the organization with story. Just need to pay attention. That's the key. And then you have your leader story. So for those of you who are leaders, whether you're a manager or whether you're a CEO or an executive director, you're all leaders. You're all seen to be leading in the organization. And so your stories are important. And sometimes story is one of the most effective, well, I would say all the time. Story is one of the most effective ways for you to show your chops, for you to show that you've done the work, you've learned stuff, you've got experience. It's not about showing off, it's about showcasing. And so when we talk about your stories as a leader, and you can use your personal stories, or you can use your frontline stories of when you did the work, or if you're a CEO and you're helping to grow managers and grow leaders, helping them by sharing stories of your leadership failures or vulnerability or challenges. those are some of the best learning opportunities for the people you work with. Same with working with clients. If you're training people on working with your front end or your front line and working with your clients, having your more experienced staff share their stories in a way that enables the new employees to learn something and not feel like they're being told how to do something. So stories, again, are really useful because often when we use them as leaders, we invite people to take a decision for themselves. So I might tell a story as a leader, and I might tell one based on something that I think is something that an employee needs to learn, or an area where they're a little bit weak. And I'm going to tell a story where I'm going to align with that experience with them, and I'm going to leave them with an end to the story, which might be, what do you think? Did I make the right call? Or, have a think about what you think I should have done differently. Come talk to me later. Or, there's ways of introducing story that enables you to connect to your employees, but also, and this is again why I love story, it's respectful, it's compassionate, it enables them to do their own learning. Sometimes people will hear your story and they'll go and make a different decision. Well, then that becomes their story and they learn anyway. So again, it's a very powerful way to keep your employees connected to you as a leader. Okay, so tips for storytelling. So we're going to talk about the telling right now. We're going to go right into the tool. As I talked about earlier, you need to get clear on your organizational so what. So that's the John F. Kennedy story, right? So if you have, whether it's your cleaner, or whether it's your admin person, or whether it's your communications person, your fundraiser, everybody needs to be really clear, and it would be great to create a story on why and what your so what is. So we do this so what, right? So what, I'm going to give you a hint. If you dig down into so what, it's not about numbers, it's not about, even about, it's partly about outcomes, but it's a really often goes down to a feeling or human connective piece. So often our organizational so what is about helping people feel included, helping people feel like they matter, caring about people, letting people know that we care about them. Like, we don't have to get all sophisticated and big and use great big words. Ultimately, the human experience is the most important one. So when you're telling your stories and sharing your so what, make sure you include some feeling in there. Make sure you include the emotional connection that your organization creates or generates for your clients. So I'm going to give you an example. For example, if you're you work for Meals on Wheels or an organization that delivers food to seniors, I mean, we can look at the front end, which is people get fed. So that's good. Yeah, that's true. However, one of the so whats that I would pull out of that and that I would think is important if it was my mom or my grandmother being served is that, sometimes that's the only person that the older person sees in a day. And it makes them feel good to see the smile on the driver or the runner's face or the person who's delivering the meal, right? So again, we need to think about how what we do impacts others at a very human level, and then build our stories to talk about that. So again, I talked about using your own stories to enable learning and decision making. Again, it's not about, I just want to be really clear, when you're using your own personal stories, this is not free therapy time. This is not the time when you can go, oh, good, somebody to dump all my stuff on. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using your own stories as a way to communicate with people that isn't about creating a direction or a directive or an instruction. Sometimes we need to use instructions and directives, and that's totally fine. I'm not saying don't do that as a leader, but choose your times. Use stories other times, and you mix it up, and so then people are able to grow themselves. They're able to grow with their own expertise and their own leadership and their own decision making, and then they want to hang around because they feel like they're growing. The other thing you can do is find opportunities to tell stories internally, and I'm going to give you some examples of that in a minute. Modeling storytelling is really important, and again, when we talk about storytelling, telling stories, it's really important that as a leader, you don't tell your team to just start telling stories without doing it yourself. And so I'm going to give you a little hint, couple hints here around telling stories. So when you do share your personal event, like it might be something that your kid did, or it might be something that a moment of learning you just wanted to share. When you're doing that, don't tell people you're going to tell them a story. Because what happens is because I can say to you now, I'm going to tell you a story, and then your body kind of goes, whoa, whoa, because it's unnatural, right? We are so used to stories that we just do it innately. And so when I announce that I'm going to tell you a story, your reaction is going to be, okay, I'm ready. What are you going to tell me? And we almost kind of think, oh, she wants to teach me something. Whereas if you're inserting story in your conversation or you're utilizing it in a way that actually enables people to feel like you're having a conversation, a two-way conversation, that's where it has most impact. Okay, so really important, don't announce that you're telling a story, whether you're doing a presentation or a speech or whether you're with an individual employee, you don't tell them that you're telling a story. And then the other thing, so we want you to weave them into your natural kind of conversation. Unless you're creating a particular time and an opportunity to share stories together, that's a little bit different, but everybody's on the same page there. And the other thing is you know, with storytelling, with any kind of presentation, what we often do is kind of like write out, edit, write, edit. Okay, now I'm ready to print. Okay, now, and then we put up our piece of paper and we're ready to go. And that's not storytelling, that's presenting. Like that is reading or that's something else. And so with storytelling, it's a little scary because it's not, it requires us to try something out without a script. I'm not saying you don't plan it. Absolutely, you write your story, practice it, but then you put your paper down and you go in and you utilize it. Or even more importantly, just kind of practice pulling out stories. I call them back pocket stories. So you can create a little story inventory for yourself, whether you're a leader or, I used to do this even as a practitioner with my clients. I wouldn't share personal information so that they knew about my personal life. That's oversharing. But there may be times that you feel like you can tell a little story so that they understand that you understand what they're going through. So that's important for leaders too. So the piece around that is just keep practicing. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's the nature of a story. And so, if we think about our mission statement, again, the process of creating a mission statement, it's so agonizing because we want it to be perfect because it has to say everything we want it to say. A story is not that. A story is a moment in time where you have an opportunity to connect with somebody else, and utilizing it in a way that is more human and more less scripted is helpful. That doesn't, like I said before, it doesn't mean you don't plan your story. It doesn't mean you don't construct your stories. Absolutely. Just practice beforehand. And then the other thing that happens, which is beautiful, is you tell it one time and then you tell it another time and it changes a little bit. And you can tailor it to the person you're talking to. So it's a really good tool, but do practice and do enjoy the lack of perfection that is storytelling. This is a big one really for me, and this is actually for this is the biggest skill that you need in being a good storyteller, story listening. Because here's the thing, how do you know where you're going to get stories, right? And it's very important that you're able to pay attention in life and be able to see and hear what other people are doing. So, the piece around story, that's how you, first of all, get your stories, is you listen, but also it's how you develop your expertise, is hearing others tell a story and just take note, oh, that really impacted me, why? What did they do that was really useful? So in terms of story listening, whether you're a leader, an HR person, or you're somebody in the organization that's just interested in story and you want to use it, here's a few tips. So the first one is be curious. So one of the things that we struggle with storytelling, it's all about the telling. It's one way, right? And so story listening is about being curious about other people, about your staff, about the world, about, you even think about your funders and about all sorts of things. And there's lots of things that you can do with your curiosity. I mean, often I would say, go and sit in a park, or go and sit in a food court. Those are two really great places. Or sit on a public transport, a bus or a subway, and just pay attention to what people are talking about, and pay attention to the stories they're telling each other. There's so many interesting things going on out there. So then the other one is about wandering, and I use that, like when I was an executive director. Okay, I have to confess to you that I did use this when I was bored, so just I'm going to be like really fess up there. But it is a real technique for leaders to understand what's going on in the organization. And I can hear some of you maybe saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm in a great big organization. I can't be wandering. I'm so busy. I'm just so busy. I can't wander. And I'm going to say, yeah, you can. And I think you should, because how do you know the temperature of your organization? How do you know what people are doing if you're not wandering and chatting and talking to them? Reports are fine, but they don't give you everything. And so I found as a leader that wandering and actually dedicating, I dedicated time each day. I mean, we're already talking about we sit at our desks too long, and but this idea to wander and just go say, hey, what are you working on, or how are things going, or tell me about something that's happened with a client you've been working with recently. I can tell you that employees love it. They love it. And the reason why is going all the way back to what we're talking about with employee engagement. They feel connected. They know that you're interested. They want to tell you. Of course, in some structures, people are really nervous of the CEO, or they're nervous of the HR manager, or whoever. But it's up to you to create some comfort, a comfort level there, and to kind of just to say to people, you know what, I'm not checking up. I'm just listening. And that's the way to connect with your people. And again, you're not going to get to, if you're in a big organization, you're not going to get to everybody all the time. However, over a year, I challenge you to get to at least one staff member every staff member at least once. And if you're in a smaller organization, like, this is real gold. Like, this is how you know what your employees are up to, what they're thinking about your work, how they feel about being there. The other thing this gives you as a leader is what I called earlier the back pocket stories. So when I was looking for money, or when I was looking to recruit volunteers or donors or people to be in the organization, or when I was working with employees, helping their performance, or even sharing, connecting them to what we're doing, I had lots of stories because I wandered. I knew where the gaps were. I knew what was happening for my staff. I can just drop those and use that in lots of different ways. The only way you can do that is to wander and to talk to your people. So highly recommend it as a tool. And also to alleviate boredom. So you can do that too. Use it. I would plan it just after lunch. It's a really great time. So there you go. And like I said before, pay attention. It's paying attention. It's, yes, you're busy. I get it. Yeah. But as a leader, your job is to pay attention. It's not just to move stuff around. And as EDs, we can easily lose a day and all of a sudden go, oh my goodness, it's 6 o'clock. So you need to book in the time to pay attention or wander. I mean, these are things to move up your priority list. And then keeping a story log. So that's one of the things that anybody can do. And organizationally, it's really useful. So again, if you are, just keep a log of the stories that, that'd be a good story. Because once you start thinking about story, you're not going to be able to stop. They're going to come in your head. Write them down, because you can't remember them all necessarily. When you write them down, then you do remember them, and then you start having a story log in your head where you can pull the stories from. So whether it's your founder story or stories about clients or personal stories that you think, this relates here, keep a log of the kinds of stories that you think might be useful in the future. Because, and sometimes you can react or respond and it helps, but looking ahead and thinking, okay, I'm going to create a way of telling stories more purposefully is very useful. So story sharing in your organization, this is a big one. It's, I can tell you, this is one of the strongest ways to connect employees to each other and to the cause and to the leader, and get them back out there working with people, especially people who, it can be very challenging because they're very vulnerable or they have lots of needs. I think, story is a really crucial thing for people who are working in the hard stuff, right? Like this is important. So often we have our team meetings and it's updates. Yep, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. Lots of things from the leader. Yep, we're doing this, we're doing that, this is happening. And then everybody goes. And I don't know about you, but I used to dread staff meetings. I used to have, there was one place I used to work, and there were 40 of us. And we all met at the same time. It was kind of crazy. But it was constant updates, and it was like 2 hours of just updates, and I didn't remember a single thing from those meetings. So I don't know whether you have meetings like that. So I suggest you introduce the story sharing element, and that might be the leader sharing a story, or it might be staff, or it might be everybody gets to share a story. What about even getting rid of team meetings and giving information through email that you need to pass on, and just having story sharing sessions? Like that really works. So the other place is performance reviews, and this is a really key one too, which again, we wait all year and then we get our ticky boxed scorecard, and it's not necessarily that useful, and there's a real backlash against that whole kind of way of doing performance reviews, even against 360s, because it's not manageable. It doesn't help people necessarily. Telling them how they did doesn't help them improve necessarily sometimes. So in your performance reviews, think about using stories. And this is where the wandering and paying attention comes in, to be able to say, you know what, Sally, when you did this, that really showed me, that was amazing, and that really made an impact on that person. And you can also use it in the other way, which is, when you did this, Sally, that really had an impact on the team. So what do you think, so you can use little anecdotes or stories to either tell them how great they did or share a moment where it didn't go so well, and then you can talk together and say, how would you deal with that next time? Like if you were to rewrite this story, how would you tell it next time, or how would it roll out next time? And then you can also share in internal communications. If you have an intranet, it's a key place. Like really, that's an amazing place to do that. And then also notice boards, again, meetings, things like that. And then you can create cross-team story sharing opportunities. So I really want to, your communications people and your fundraising people need to know what your frontline people are doing. So creating cross storytelling is really a crucial thing for all of them, because it's really tough to be sitting in a communications department and be given the role of social media and not know what the heck the rest of the organization is doing. So it's a missed opportunity for them to not be able to share what the organization is doing to help people. Okay, so here's a quick poll. Do you think there are opportunities to introduce story sharing in your organization? Can you think of places? Yes, no, don't know.
Great. So once again, we'll invite you all to go ahead and vote on your screen. And pretty overwhelming results so far. Yay. Yeah, we'll just give another few seconds, let a few more people participate here. Great. So we'll just share those results with everyone. So I think you made your case.
Yay! 95% of you said yes. That's great. And so your action from today, after this webinar, is to write down 3 ways that you're going to suggest story sharing in your organization, because 95% means an absolute yes. So thank you, everybody, for that. That's great. If you can build it in lots of different ways, that's great, but just start with 3. Start with 3. Okay, so here's a quick overview of your impact stories. So here's a structure to use when you're sharing impact. So you have your beginning, which is the description of the situation. So this is what's happening for the person or the community. You have your middle, which is outline the problem. What's happening for them? So the description of the situation might be, Janet is a single mom. She's living in affordable housing. She's lost her job. She doesn't. And the problem is she doesn't have any money to get groceries for her kid, just a really basic one. So the middle is the problem. She doesn't have any money to. And so then your end is, as an employment or as a community employment service, we helped Janet to beef up her skills, and she was able to earn more money. She was able to find a job. In the meantime, while she was looking for a job, we connected her to a food bank, which meant she was, you know what I mean? Like this is the kind of the beginning, middle, and end. You all know this story structure. It's how fairy tales are told. And then the piece at the very end is, how did life change for the client and community? That's the bit that you need to. And so I would say the first two are a third of your story, and the 2/3 of the story is the end. So you spend more time on that. So that's a really just a quick show in terms of how story structure works for impact. So we're now at question time.
Great. Thank you, Lianne. This has been quite an informative session. Very, very interesting for sure. And we've got a few questions that have popped up, and I'm going to just remind everybody, if you have any questions for Lianne, now's the time to get them into the question box so that we can try to address those for you. So let's start out with a question about using stories for quality improvement. Do you have any tips on this, Lianne?
Oh, nice. Yes. You know what? In terms of quality improvement, you can create baseline story. Like I guess we're going to talk on a couple levels. One is on an organizational level for quality improvement, starting with baseline stories. So doing a kind of I don't know how to say it, but collect a whole bunch of stories, and again, do it independently. This is not your leader. It's really crucial. This is not, I would actually bring somebody in externally to collect the stories of what's happening with your organization so that you have a good sense of what's going on. Or if you have like an HR person who's not in the front line, or you can use somebody internal for sure. But you can actually get baseline stories, and then you have your quality improvement piece, and then you have your 3 months in, let's collect more stories. And you can get the temperature of what the measures that you are creating are having. So we can use surveys too. Those absolutely use the surveys as you're measuring how the quality improvement is rolling out. But collecting stories at the beginning, the middle, and the end are really good anecdotal evidence as to how or whether the quality and the improvements are being made. Because sometimes we think we know what improvements need to be made, but the stories will help us get clues as to why and how they're not working, rather than that really dry information that really doesn't give us anything. So collect the stats, and so I always talk about data plus story equals evidence. So when you're talking about quality improvement, you want your data, you want your story, and then you've got your evidence of what's working, what's not working, and so you can change course in terms of the improvements you're making, or you can also just say, hey, we're on track, this is great. So they're a really good use, but like I say, combine them with your data so that you've got both areas.
Fantastic. And with regards to the founder story, we had someone asking about their organization has multiple founders, and maybe it might be a bit tricky kind of navigating creating a founder story and honoring all of those people. Do you have any tips for kind of navigating that scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some organizations where the person, like, people don't actually know the person. Like, the person isn't kind of the hero story. Like, so we call it, sometimes the founder story is the hero story, right? It's this person saw a social need, they created this organization, aren't they amazing? And they received the Order of Canada, and that's one kind of founder story. But the more general kind of founder story is the one that you've just asked about, which is actually, it's about the problem the organization was trying to solve. So it's less about an individual, and it's more about, so you could call it the founding story instead, which is, it might be, women, and so, women in the rural community in the 1970s. This is an organization I used to work for. This is their story. So there was a rural area. There were lots of farmers. There was an economic challenge, and so lots of the men were drinking, and some of the women got together, and they formed a support group to, and then brought in Al-Anon and created ways of supporting each other. And then that grew into recognizing that there were lots of other community needs. So what was the problem that was occurring, and what was the solution the organization wanted to bring? That's your founding story. And it could be an individual founder, or it could be a group of people either way. And sometimes it's better to use that founding story because you especially if you're moving away from the founder, if you're having a transition from founder, you really need your founding story, the why it exists and what it's supposed to do to make life better for the community it serves.
Wonderful. And with regards to staff meetings, do you have any suggestions on how to use storytelling as an icebreaker at the beginning of the staff meeting?
Absolutely. One is to build it in. So I wouldn't use it as an icebreaker. I would say this is part of what we do every staff meeting, because icebreaker uses, and I do know what you mean, it's to kind of break the ice. But in fact, we want to be careful about that because icebreakers we often groan at and we're worried about. So I would say that if you're introducing it into the staff meeting, you're introducing it as a serious way to make sure that, to share how the organization is making a difference. And so as a leader, or even as an HR person, I would say, you know what, we need to tell our stories in order to know how we're serving people and how well we're doing. There's a couple ways you can do that, and also to find challenges. So you can either have each staff member gets a turn every week to share one story of success and another staff member shares a story of challenge. You could have one story of challenge that everybody kind of joins in on and says, okay, well, we could have done this there, we could have done that there. Those are really popular. But I would also say that leaders, it's important for them to start. Whoever's the most senior person in the room should start with a story of some kind so that it enables everybody else to feel comfortable.
Great. And here's another great question. Anne has indicated, our stories tend to mirror what we say the benefits of our membership are. Do you have a suggestion on how to dig deeper?
Yes. So what is my favorite way. So I have an exercise, and I delivered some workshops, and people loved this and hated it because it's very hard. So what I'm going to suggest to you is, if you want to dig down into the real impact of what you do a so what exercise. So you get somebody else to be a so whatter, and you say, you talk about the benefits, and you're going to get them to say so what. Or you can do this on a piece of paper yourself, and you're going to keep saying so what until you feel something that connects you to what the person is saying, or they connect to you. So the so what exercise is one of the best ways for you to dig a lot deeper. So just be ruthless with yourself and just keep saying so what, so what, so what, and you'll find a bunch of language, and you'll find a core feeling that you create for your membership. Membership places, usually the bottom line story is to feel a sense of belonging. The benefits are usually the thing that you sell. Those are not your why. So the so what will take you to your why, which is the thing that people most want to know about before joining.
Wonderful. And perhaps there's a staff member who doesn't seem engaged with the mission or vision of the organization. Do you have any tips on what types of stories you might start out with to try to engage this person a bit more fully?
Yes, I would start with listening to their stories. So I would actually ask that person to tell a story of a time when they felt happy in the work they were doing. Because you can find out what it is that lights them up and what it is that makes them want to be there. So I would start there. I would start by listening rather than telling.
Fantastic. And from Abby, do you have tips on how to use stories to persuade them to do something that is essential to the organization? So her example was perhaps being more environmentally friendly.
You know what, there's two things you can do there. One is, if it's essential to the organization, that's where directives and instructions come in. However, those sometimes aren't paid attention to. Well, why should we recycle? Why should we do this? So then you build a story as to why it's important to the organization. So it could be if we didn't do this, this is what would happen story, or it could be this is why it's important to us kind of story. But if it is something that's absolutely crucial, then there has to be a level of this is crucial, this is non-negotiable, and then you build on top of that stories that support it, that enable people to engage. So again, that environmental story is very tough because it's a big story that often people are struggling to relate to. So find something within your organization that shows why it's meaningful within your organization.
Wonderful. And we're just coming up on time here, so we're just going to have one last question. Are there any additional resources you might recommend to help an organization and leadership move forward with storytelling?
Absolutely. So, so I'm going to just do my slide here. Which is yes. So there, if you Google storytelling, there are lots and lots and lots of resources out there for leaders around storytelling. There are also a number of consultants around offering, including myself. I'm a story coach, so I'm always available to help. But I would also go on YouTube, and I would Google, or I would go on YouTube and look for. You can type in nonprofit storytelling, and there are some amazing stories to be told out there. So if you're just looking for kind of finding out what storytelling is, then and just Google it. I do recommend, and I say this with a vested interest, of course, is sometimes you want somebody to come in and help people because it's not something they've normally been doing. But I also say it starts with the leader. So if the leader can start kind of looking at story, there are lots of books. There's a book by Annette Simmons called The Storytelling Factor, which I highly recommend. There's a book by Paul Smith called Lead with a Story. So there's books, there's podcasts. I also do a radio show called Story Powered. It's sometimes more for businesses, but it's on the Voice America Business Network, and so you can have a listen to some really great leaders there. But I'd say start with our friend Google and see where it lands. But you're always welcome to contact me at verygoodstories.com or have a look at my website. Always happy to connect with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Lianne, for a really, really great presentation. Before we sign off today, I want to remind everyone that we're going to follow up with you by email, and that will have the webinar recording and the presentation slides. We'll also include a link to a very short survey. So if you can take 5 minutes to fill that out, it's really helpful for us. It helps us further refine our webinar content and delivery, and you'll also have an opportunity there to let us know if there's any topics you'd like to see us covered in a future session. And you can watch for that email tomorrow morning in your inbox. I want to thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.